Hey everyone, I'm Mark, and today we're going to look at all of the skills that'll help you progress in Flight Sim by breaking it down into building blocks to go from total beginner to a place where you feel comfortable in most situations. A lot of the skills we'll look at build on each other, but unlike in the real world, there's nothing stopping you from skipping a few steps in the middle, and I've tried to find a balance that'll get you to what interests you as fast as possible while still giving you everything you need to succeed. I can't show you how to do everything in this one single video. My goal instead is to help you identify which skills you need to level up to bring your flight simming to the next level and to see the bigger picture of everything you can learn in Flight Sim. Let's start from the beginning though, since regardless of what you eventually want to do in Flight Sim, the place where almost everyone starts and that I'll recommend as well is with a single engine piston plane. Planes like the C-172 are very popular for training flights for a reason, because they make learning the basic flight controls easier and more forgiving, and the in-game tutorials do a decent job of explaining these if you're completely new to Flight Sim. What you should be looking to get out of those first few steps is an understanding of how all the control surfaces work together and what happens to the plane when you move any one of them. One of the things that helped me the most to understand the relationship between the throttle, the yoke, the rudder pedals, and the trim was to just get in the air and practice starting climbs and descents, leveling off, changing speed, all one after the other until I got the hang of how it all works together. You'll also want to get a solid grasp of how to read the most commonly used instruments on the PFD, including knowing what all of the notches and color ranges indicate on the different dials so that you can interpret what the plane is trying to tell you. This is also a good point to learn basic GPS navigation, knowing how to follow the HSI, as well as how to get back on course if you end up off track for whatever reason. The autopilot's also tightly integrated into these displays, and at minimum I'd make sure I understand how the heading and nav modes work, along with vertical speed and flight level change, since these will remove some of the burden of doing everything yourself. Again, the best way to get comfortable with all of this is to just get in the air and play around with it, and don't be too worried about following any rules or screwing anything up, because no one's going to be watching. The last key skill that you need to travel to and from nearby airports is how to fly a traffic pattern or circuit so that you can practice and bring it all together, on top of knowing how to join it regardless of the direction that you're arriving from so that you can line yourself up with the runway. One thing that can help if you're struggling to find and line up with runways is the visual approach feature of the glass cockpits, since these will give you an extended runway centerline that makes it so much easier when you're just starting out. Now, if all you want to do is fly small planes over short distances in ideal situations, then what we just covered will get you going and then some. But at some point, if you're anything like me, you'll probably want to take things to the next level. A fun step in that direction is learning how to do a cold and dark start, so starting from the ramp with everything powered off, because it's a lot of fun to flip all those switches, and it's a great way to get more into the weeds of how the different systems work together. This is also a good point to learn more about when to use all the exterior and the interior light switches, because I can't tell you the number of times that I've been caught out as it's getting dark looking for a light switch, especially when you're changing planes frequently. Also, learning to navigate around the airport with different markings and signs will not only help you to find your way, but it'll also help you to know where to stop, as well as the places where you shouldn't go as you're taxiing around. As for the takeoff itself, there's more you can dig into there as well, like knowing the difference between the VX, VY, and VR speeds, and when to use each one depending on your situation. You've likely been sticking to altitudes that are fairly low to the ground so far, but this is a good time to learn how the red mixture lever works and how to use it in flight as you climb above 3,000 feet. That'll lead you nicely into learning how to operate at higher altitude airports, where you'll need to understand how density altitude affects your aircraft's performance and how to make sure that you actually have enough power to get airborne. This is actually a good point to switch to a faster, more powerful plane if you haven't done it already, and the Bonanza is a good step up since it'll give you the chance to look at the relationship between the throttle, the mixture, and now the propeller lever. This obviously makes things more complicated, but it also gives you more flexibility in how you configure the plane in every phase of flight, and it's a good thing to get a hang of if you want to fly more complex or older general aviation planes. There's also a ton more features and details to the G1000 that you can look into, including more of the autopilot modes like VNAV, as well as the terrain, traffic, and weather radars, which will all come in handy in different situations. Speaking of the weather, it's good to know the wind limitations for the plane that you're flying, as well as being able to decode a METAR or TAFE to know what the current conditions actually are. Crosswind takeoff and landing skills are also essential for flying with live weather, since the wind is rarely going to be perfectly aligned with a runway, and you'll need to know how to handle varying conditions. There are a few different techniques you can use, like crabbing and slipping into the wind, and all of them require you to get a much better understanding of the physics of the different control surfaces, which is a lot of fun to get the hang of. I'm going to assume if you've made it this far, you're definitely someone who appreciates the finer details of flight simming, so if you haven't already, I'd turn all the assistance options to hard so that you have the most authentic experience possible. When you have enough experience, having the assists on can actually make it harder because you'll be fighting a computer trying to control some things that it's actually trying to do, like for example, controlling the rudder, and you want all of that to be under your control. If you really want to go deep and you have a highly detailed GA plane, like say the 828 Comanche, you can also go the route of learning how to handle failures, from simple stuff like the vertical speed gauge not working to more complicated issues like an engine failure. Oftentimes, planes that support failures will also have a full section in the manual or the tablet on how to handle them, and the most important one, an engine failure, is something that you can practice fairly easily and is actually a ton of fun to do. The first few times that you try this, make sure that you're close to the airport and then just pull the mixture lever all the way out, which will eventually kill your engine. And that's where you'll want to know all the intricacies of how to handle it, from making sure that your propeller is windmilling to configuring for the best glide distance. The next building block that'll unlock a lot of things for you is getting a grasp on the core concepts around instrument flying, and if you still haven't moved up to a faster single engine piston plane like the Bonanza yet, I'd probably do that first. The reason for that is that a lot of the instrument procedures you're going to do take a long time to fly in a smaller plane like the C-172, and even though a faster plane does make things more challenging, I also think it'll be a lot more fun. There are lots of little details that go into instrument flying, but one of the most fundamental elements is getting used to relying on your instruments by doing regular scans of the attitude indicator, the altimeter, the airspeed, and the HSI, which all together are going to guide you to wherever you're going. The place where almost everyone starts off is the ILS approach, which will help you not only to line up with the runway, but it'll also tell you if you're too high or too low, which can help when you're in the clouds, but also for normal landings too. Our nav approaches are another way to get down to the ground when you can't see where you're going, and I personally think these are the most fun type of approaches to fly in flight sim because you often have last second turns and steep descents. The way I would practice instrument approaches is pretty straightforward. I would just take off, fly around the airport in a much wider circuit than normal, and then turn back around and set myself up to shoot the approach back to the same runway. That lets you practice without wasting time, because there's nothing more frustrating than flying a full flight, getting close to your destination, and then either not knowing how or just completely screwing up on those last 15 miles to the ground. Another type of approach that I love doing in flight sim is the circle to land, which starts as an instrument approach to one runway, and once you're visual with the field, you then circle to the opposite runway to land, and when there's mountains and tight spaces around, it can make for a very spicy approach. Also, don't forget about holds and go-arounds, which often go together, since these will give you the confidence to abort your approach and know that you can make it back to the runway even if you can't see where you're going. You'll also want to brush up on IFR flight planning at this point, whether that's SimBrief, Navigraph, Little Navmap, or the built-in planner. They all solve the same problem in a different way and are all perfectly valid options. These flight planning tools usually have a way to create the route for you automatically, but going a step further and learning how to do it yourself will force you to understand things at a much deeper level, and it's pretty fun to do as well because it adds to the immersion. With regards to the flight plan itself, as you start to fly out of and into bigger airports, you'll also run into procedures called SIDS and STARS, which are there to get you on your way and set you up for the approach respectively. These will typically have restrictions in terms of airspeeds and altitudes that you need to follow, but the bigger challenge I would say is actually picking the right procedure for your route and plane, since a lot of them are going to apply only to certain aircraft and certain situations. That's why you'll want to take some time to understand how to read and interpret the different charts that you're using, as well as understand the subtle details that are explained in them so that you can make the right decision for your flight. That's nowhere near the end of what you can do in terms of VFR and IFR flying though, and if you really want to challenge yourself, you can also find your way around without a GPS whatsoever. There's nothing wrong with using the built-in GPS displays per se, although it does create more of a reliance on using automation. For me, the big thing is that it's not super engaging since you can just enable the autopilot, sit back, and watch it do everything for you. One of the coolest aspects of flight simming is that you can wind the clock back and navigate like they did 30 to 50 years ago without a magenta line to follow, and in terms of VFR flying, that all starts by learning to create and use a navlog to get where you're going. Flying this type of flight plan with dead reckoning and pilotage involves using only your heading indicator and a timer, and it's going to have you physically looking for the landmarks that you want to follow on the ground, which will make for a hugely engaging flight. The other way to navigate without a GPS is with IFR flying, and it relies on old ground-based technology like VORs and NDBs to navigate from place to place, whether you're in the clouds or in good weather. Pretty much the only thing you won't be able to do with an analog IFR flight is an RNAV approach, but you can fly ILS approaches like this and also other non-precision approaches like VORs, NDBs, and DME arcs, which aren't as common anymore to be fair, but there are some famous ones still around. It's a lot more challenging to fly like this, especially if you're in the clouds the whole time, but I guarantee that you will not be bored, and it's incredibly satisfying to fly a full flight like this and emerge from the clouds right where you expect to be. If you're worried that non-GPS flying will be a little bit too difficult, what you can do is learn how it works in a plane with a glass cockpit first and only fall back to the GPS if you get lost, which is exactly what I did in my tutorial series on this, and then from there you can move to a full analog plane when you're ready. On top of all the flying skills, getting comfortable with working the radios and talking to ATC is a huge step in your flight simming journey, from learning the lingo to knowing who to contact, regardless of if you're using the default ATC or an AI-based solution like Beyond ATC. So far, everything we've looked at was with a single engine piston plane, but if I look at my path with flight simming, at the same time as I was learning a lot of the IFR stuff, I was also getting up to speed on flying faster GA planes. The main options there are twin pistons or single and twin turboprops, and they can have cruise speeds well above 150 knots, so those longer distance routes become much more attainable. The only thing is you'll want to have a decent grasp of IFR flying first, because you'll be relying on your instruments a lot more with them. The difference with turboprops is that they can climb much higher than pistons, so you'll be dealing with pressurization systems and likely flying in the low Mach numbers, so you can really cross distances that you could never do before. Getting a basic knowledge of how turboprop engines work differently from pistons, especially things like power settings, beta range, torque limits, and even ITT monitoring, will all come in handy to avoid causing any damage to the engines. At first glance, an extra engine might just seem like something that will allow you to travel faster, but there's additional complexity that you'll want to get a grasp on. Things like the minimum control speed on takeoff and how to properly shut down an engine if you have a failure are both concepts that you'll want to learn about, since they can be the difference between a controllable and uncontrollable plane. If I had to pick between the two types, I'd probably go with a turboprop like the TBM 930 as my next step, just because they're more versatile and faster. But I always approach learning a new plane the same way, by bringing it back to basics, and I fly a bunch of circuits around the airport until I've gotten the hang of it and I can configure it for any phase of flight. There's also something to be said about going deep on a specific plane and learning the full procedures and how all the systems work internally, especially for a highly detailed plane like the Duke or the Comanche. It'll increase your level of comfort for flying it into any weather condition, approach, or even into remote strips in the backcountry, so pretty much any scenario that you can think of. We only had time to cover general aviation skills today, but let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a follow-up where we look at the skills you'll need for flying business jets, modern and classic airliners, and a ton more. And if you learned something useful today, please make sure to like the video and subscribe on your way out to get more videos like this one.